Ladies and gentlemen, I'll keep this introduction short because I gather there will not be many people tonight that are not familiar with the works of Bret Easton Ellis. Many of you will have read his first novel, Less Than Zero, when it appeared in 1985, I think, when its author was in his early 20s. Its shockingly bleak portrayal of a group of rich teenagers in their soulless search for drugs and sex in Los Angeles made it one of the most publicized novels of that decade. But other than most hyped novels, Less Than Zero really touched a nerve with a whole generation. And some 14 years later, after its publication, it has easily outlived most of the so-called Lost Generation novels it was originally grouped with. Why is that? The hype and scandal that has surrounded Ellis' work from the beginning on has tended to obscure what is obvious to anyone who actually reads it, that he is a writer deeply committed to his own work, and easily the most radical voice in American fiction today. One of the most telling paradoxes that haunts this writer is that with every new novel he is accused of mindless superficiality or cheap tendency to shock. In other words, that he is too much implicated in his own superficial subject matter. Only after all the negative publicity has died down, readers and critics slowly start to discover what that novel is all about. This has happened with practically all his books, with Less Than Zero, with The Rules of Attraction, and it is happening now again with his new novel, Glamorama. But clearly the work which has most suffered from this, of course, is American Psycho, which appeared in 1990 and caused an instant uproar. Publishers, critics and activists alike made this book out as if it had been written by the devil himself, not a novel at all, but only endless descriptions of mechanical sex and clinically detailed scenes of slaughter and human vivisection. The critics that wouldn't allow themselves to confess that they were shocked just called the book dull and badly written. Naturally, the scandal surrounding it made the book a big success, and easily the most talked about novel of the 90s. But its importance and sheer originality has only gradually become clear. Today the book reads as a brilliant satire, not only of 80s American yuppie culture with its shiny surface and its dark other side, but also, and in my view more importantly, as a satire of a mass society in which a sense of personal identity has all but disappeared and has been replaced by an outside world of surfaces. The fading of the boundaries between reality and the imagination, the projection of an inner world on the outer world, bring with it the absurdly real fantasies of sexual violence that fill the existence and mind of Patrick Bateman. In that sense, American Psycho tells us more about modern society than a celebrated futurist novel like 1984 has ever done. For one thing, its claustrophobia strikes me as more realistic. In more than one sense, that novel has already become a classic. It's easy to sneer at the detractors of Ellis' work, who can't or won't see beneath the glittering surface of his work, but the truth is that Ellis himself remains an elusive writer. Even his most fervent admirers don't seem to be able to decide if he is driven by nihilism or moralism. And Bret Easton Ellis is not the kind of writer who provides theories and interpretations to his own work. Profiles of him in magazines usually devote countless words on his appearance and behavior and preferences. There are endless discussions about the furniture in an apartment. The big news last year was that he bought a couch, or the lack of it, and what it all means. But the work itself is more often than not merely glossed over. While he obviously suffers from the often brutal verbal attacks on his books and personality, and when the scandal about American Psycho was at its height, he kindly took the trouble to point out that he himself was no sadistic serial killer, he seems aware that it's dangerous for a serious writer to explain himself too much. At times he seems to be very much part of the world of glamour he so chillingly describes. At others he appears as an aloof, almost visionary moralist, almost too deeply aware of the moral vacuum that lies in the heart of the modern Western world. His books don't explain themselves, and I'm thankful for that. They have no clear moral tact on them by their writer. They don't offer easy or sentimental home truth about the human condition. So you can well imagine how glad I am that Mr. Ellis accepted the invitation of the John Adams Institute to talk about his new novel Glamorama, which has just appeared in a Dutch translation. We will discuss the new book exhaustively, but first Mr. Ellis will read the first of 2 passages he has chosen. Our talk will last about 20 minutes, and after Mr. Ellis has read again to us, please feel free to ask him the questions you always wanted him to ask him, but never thought you would get the chance of asking him personally. Mr. Ellis, may I ask you up to...
Thank you very much. I mean, I don't know quite how to live up to an introduction like that. That was very, very nice. I'm going to read just for about... okay. That's a little loud. Oh, it's okay. This is better? This one? I'm going to read from this new novel, Glamorama, just for about 5 or 6 minutes, and then when I talk to him, we'll have an interview, and then I'll read another passage. The 2 passages I'm going to read tonight... well, the problem is that in a book, this is the first book that I've had a problem reading out loud from in front of audiences, because usually I like to jump around a book and read from certain places in a book. And the problem with this book, I found through trial and error during my book tour, is that this is the first book I've written that has a plot, that has a story of some kind, and it's very difficult to read passages from the book later on and have to explain to the audience constantly what I'm talking about. So the 2 passages I'll read tonight, the first one right now, concern the narrator's relationship with his girlfriend, which is falling apart. And the first section I'll read is from the last time they had a vacation together, and then the second section I'll read later on will be from the first time they met. This book is narrated by a man named Victor Ward, who is, I suppose, what you would call the it boy of the moment in Manhattan, a male model who is famous for being famous, for hanging around famous people, really famous for no accomplishment on his own. And I'm just going to read, and then I'll talk to Boston. We'll continue this. So this is from Glamorama. This is a section about when him and his girlfriend went on vacation. Chloe and I went to LA last September for reasons we never really figured out, though in retrospect I think it had something to do with trying to save our relationship. And Chloe was supposed to be a presenter at the MTV Awards, which I remember nothing of except Oscar talk, Frida Kahlo talk, Mr. Jenkins talk, how big is Dweezil Zappa's dick talk, Sharon Stone wearing pajamas, Edgar Bronfman Jr. coming on to Chloe, only 2 green juji fruits in the box I held while spacing out during the ceremony, and it was all really just Cindy, 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 and in every photo printed of me, in W, in Us, in Rolling Stone, I am holding the same half-empty bottle of Evian. We stayed at the Chateau Marmont in a giant suite with a balcony twice its size overlooking West LA. When Chloe didn't want to talk, she'd rush to the bathroom, turn on the hairdryer full blast, and point it toward my calm, bewildered face. Her nickname for me during those weeks out there was my little zombie. I tried out for it and didn't get the part of a drug addict's friend in a medical drama pilot that ultimately was never produced, but it didn't really matter. Since I was so out of it, I even had to reread things Paula Abdul said in interviews. Chloe was always dying of thirst. There were always tickets for some lame-o screening. Our conversations were always garbled. The streets were always, inexplicably, covered with confetti. We were always at barbecues at Herb Ritz, which were always attended by either Madonna or Josh Brolin or Amy Locan or Veronica Webb or Stephen Dorff or Ed L'Amato or Richard Gere or Layla Roshan or Ace of Base, where turkey burgers were always served, which we always washed down with pink grapefruit iced tea, and bonfires were always lit throughout the city, along with the giant cones of Klieg lights announcing premieres. When we went to an AIDS fundraiser thrown by Lily Tartikoff at Barney's, cameras flashed, and Chloe's dry hand clenched my limp hand, and she squeezed it only once, a warning, when a reporter from E! Television asked me what I was doing there, and I said I needed an excuse to wear my new Versace tuxedo. I could barely make it up a series of steep staircases to the top floor, but once I was there, Christian Slater gave me a high five, and we hung out with Dennis Leary, Helen Hunt, Billy Zane, Joelle Fisher, Claudia Schiffer, Matthew Fox. Someone pointed someone else out to me and whispered, "The piercing didn't take." Before melting back into the crowd, people talked about cutting off their hair and burning their fingernails. Most people were mellow and healthy, tan and buff, and drifting around. Others were so hysterical, sometimes covered with lumps and bruises, that I couldn't understand what they were saying to me. So I tried to stay close to Chloe to totally make sure she didn't fall back into any destructive habits. And she wore capri pants and Kamali makeup, canceled aromatherapy appointments that I was unaware she had made. Her diet dominated by grape and lemongrass and root beer flavored granitas. Chloe didn't return phone calls from Evan Dando, Robert Town, Don Simpson, Victor Dre, Frank Mancuso Jr., Shane Black. She was bawling constantly and bought a print by Frank Gehry for something like 30 grand and an Ed Ruscha fog painting for considerably more. Chloe bought Lucien Gau's Shogun table lamps and a lot of iron baskets and had it all shipped back to Manhattan. Rejecting people was the hot pastime. We had a lot of sex. Everyone talked about the year 2018. One day we pretended to be ghosts. Danny Jansen wanted to take us to mysterious places, and I was asked by 4 separate people what my favorite land animal was, and since I didn't know what these were, I couldn't even fake an answer. Hanging out with 2 of the Beastie Boys at a house in Silver Lake, we met a lot of crew-cut blondes, and Tamara Davis, and Gray Kinnear, and David Fincher, and Perry Farrell. Yum, ice was a constant refrain while we drank lukewarm Bacardi and Cokes and bitched about taxes. In the backyard, a pool that had been drained was filled with rubble, and the Chase lounges had empty syringes scattered all over them. The only question I asked during dinner was, "Why don't you just grow your own?" From where I stood, I watched someone take 10 minutes to cut a slice of cheese. There was a topiary in the shape of Elton John in the backyard next to the rubble-strewn pool. We were eating Vicodin and listening to Nico-era Velvet Underground tapes. "Hey, baby, the petty ugliness of our problems seems so ridiculous in the face of all this natural beauty," I said to Chloe. "Baby, that's an Elton John topiary behind you," Chloe said. Back at the chateau, CDs were scattered all over the suite, and empty Federal Express packages littered the floor. The word miscellany seemed to sum up everything we felt about each other, or so Chloe said. We had fights at Chaya Brasserie, 3 in the Beverly Center, one later in Le Colonial at a dinner for Nick Cage, another at House of Blues. We kept telling each other it didn't matter, that we didn't care, fuck it, which was actually pretty easy to do. During one of our fights, Chloe called me a peon who had about as much ambition as a parking lot attendant. She wasn't right, she wasn't wrong. If we were stuck in the suite of the chateau after a fight, there was really no place left to go, either the kitchen or the balcony, where 2 parrots named Blinky and Scrubby, the gibbering idiot, hung out. She lay in bed in her underwear, light from the TV flooding the darkened suite, the Cocteau twins droning from the stereo, and during these lulls, I would wander out by the pool and chew gum and drink Fruitopia while reading an old issue of Film Threat or the book Final Exit, rereading a chapter titled Self-Deliverance via the Plastic Bag. We were in a non-zone. 10 or 11 producers were found dead in various Bel Air mansions that week. I autographed the back of a Jones matchbook in my nearly indecipherable scrawl for some young thing. I mused about publishing my journal entries in details. There was a sale at Maxfield's, but we had no patience. We ate tamales in empty skyscrapers and ordered bizarre hand rolls in sushi bars done up in industrial chic decor in restaurants with names like Muse, Fusion, Buffalo Club, with people like Jack Nicholson, Ann Magnuson, Los Lobos, Sean McPherson, a 14-year-old male model named Dragonfly, who Jimmy Rip really dug. We spent too much time at the Four Seasons bar and not enough at the beach. A friend of Chloe's gave birth to a dead baby. I left ICM. People told us that they either were vampires or knew someone who was a vampire. Drinks with Depeche Mode. So many people we vaguely knew died or disappeared the weeks we were there. Car accidents, AIDS, murders, overdoses, run over by a truck, fell into vats of acid or maybe were pushed, that the amount for funeral wreaths on Chloe's visa was almost $5,000. I looked really great. Thanks. Thank you.
Well, I know you must have been intellectually exhausted because you just survived Paul de Leeuw show, but...
Intellectually exhausted from the Paul de Leeuw show? I thought it was actually quite a nice way to be welcomed to Amsterdam. I mean, to have Paul de Leeuw flirt with you for 12 minutes was actually not a bad experience as far as, bad experiences go, I suppose. It was all right.
Well, we'll just have a free-flowing conversation from now on. Leave the intellectual heavy stuff behind us. From what I've read about it, About it, I get the impression that finishing Glamorama was nothing short of a kind of personal liberation to you. Is that true?
Well, since it took so long to complete, and I began the book in at the end of 1989, and I finished it about 8 years later, yes, it ended up being something that surprised me, because once I was done with it, I felt like a much stronger person. I felt like I had much more confidence, and a lot of insecurity I had before about certain aspects of my life fell away. And not necessarily because there was any material in here that was so personal and I was so involved with, but just the sheer act of finishing this long book I felt better when I finished it, I have to admit, and I didn't think that was going to happen, but it did.
Did that have to do that you'd proven that there was life for your writing after American Psycho?
Well, you know, the American Psycho controversy did not ever make me doubt being a writer. It made me doubt a lot of other things. It might have made me doubt the intelligence of certain people. It maybe made me doubt a sense of safety in the world, and especially the publishing world, where before I'd been taken very good care of. I was like this little boy who was always the youngest person at the table, and then American Psycho came out, and I was booted from the table, was not invited, to join anybody for meals anymore. But at that time, I mean, that part of my life and my writing life were always kept very separate. And as I said before, I mean, I had started Glamorama before American Psycho was published, and my confidence in a way about the actual writing of books and whatever horrible things or problems I've had in my life often don't affect that. So I can't say I can connect the two really so much.
Looking back, can you say why it took so long for you to finish? I mean, it's a long book, but...
It is a long book, and I've been telling people for a long time that it took about 8 years to write. In actuality, if I really had to say how long it took during those 8 years, I would say more like 4.5 or 5 years. Basically what happened was it began with the American Psycho controversy. I'd been about 100 pages into Glamorama when the controversy about American Psycho began, and it was so distracting that I took about a year off from writing it because I couldn't concentrate. And then once I got back into writing Glamorama, my father suddenly died and left a very complicated and messy estate where he owed a lot of debts, and I was the executor of his will, and I had to go to court and fight off creditors and people like that. And then once that was all over, I began writing the book again, and then a long-term relationship I'd been in broke up, and that was very distracting. And then I mean, the list goes on. I mean, I published The Informers because I owed a book to my publisher, and so they published a book of short stories of mine, and then I had I would say probably a couple problems with drugs and alcohol that definitely hampered the completion of Glamorama. So you put all those things together, and you've got quite a decade, actually, when I think about it. A lot of stuff happened. That was a very complicated time. So
now I understand why you find it a liberation that it's finished. The book is there. How do you write? I mean, do you a book like you just told the audience that it's the first book you actually used a plot, and it's a very intricate plot, so intricate that most critics don't get it.
I don't know if I get it. I mean, I'm not sure if I fully understand, but no.
But well, in this case, had you done all the plotting beforehand?
Yeah, the book was very carefully outlined beforehand, and it wasn't as if I had a conscious desire to write a book with a plot. I actually wanted to write a book that was about a conspiracy, and I think from that conspiracy, that's really at the heart of Glamorama, a plot flowed from that, and I realized, well, if I'm going to write a book with a conspiracy, you're going to have to somehow explain it, and that does entail storytelling and narrative, two things that I really had not been interested in before, two things that I had always felt as a much younger writer were very artificial and phony and didn't belong in a book, and my concerns were much more, I guess, almost journalistic or reportage, investigating a world, just going in there and following a character around aimlessly for 200 or 300 pages, and there was the truth, that a plot would intrude upon that honesty of the vision. I don't agree with that anymore, and I feel much differently now about writing a novel and constructing a novel than I did when I was in my 20s, and I wrote actually all my novels when I was in my 20s, so... Yeah.
Because Victor Ward is a character with a development, you could say. He even splits. I mean, you could say, but he's really. The plot actually comes as a surprise, because the first 180 pages, more or less, they have this manic quality of the fragment you just read, the passage you just read, and then it goes to Europe, and the novel becomes a transatlantic novel, and then the plot goes. How do you see Victor Ward?
Well, I just realized sitting here that out of all my novels, in the end, the person I'm most compassionate toward is my stupidest narrator, my dumbest narrator, and it just dawned on me that the other books, I was very harsh and judgmental toward their personas and very unsympathetic to the plights they found themselves in, and that includes Clay in Lesson Zero, and I suppose the college students in Rules of Attraction, and definitely Patrick Bateman in American Psycho. But there is a sense of compassion for Victor in this book that I don't know what the connection is between his being such an airhead and so out of it, and then my feeling quite bad for him in the end, and relating to his panic and his paranoia and his anxiety as his world gets increasingly violent and screwed up. But Victor Ward really began for me as a summation of everything that bothered me about a lot of men I knew of my generation, and a certain attitude I saw in my generation of men in the States. Preoccupation with celebrity, vanity, and intense narcissism, a kind of hip attitude that flattened out all other emotions, an obsession with superficial things, finding the truth in surfaces and believing surfaces, and all of that stuff was where Victor Ward began. And in many ways, Victor Ward to me is a summation of a lot of issues I guess I have with my generation, I suppose, and that's where the character really was, how he was created.
In some respects, he seems to resemble Patrick Bateman in the sense that he is. This is my interpretation. I agree with that. But the tension between his outward way of living, the way he wants to be, and and the truth about his position, creates the tension between his inward life and the outside. What he wants to be tends to create a lot of violent fantasies. I mean, in Glamorama, it's not very clear if the plot, the whole conspiracy, is in Victor's head, or is real, or is filmed, is a film. I mean, you confuse the issue magnificently. So that's something that he has in common with Patrick Bateman, I think. The irreality of some scenes, people who are dead who are become alive again. This whole dislocation of reality.
Well, I can make this very easy for you. Everything that happens in the book is real. Actually, everything that happens, it's not in his head, is no figment of his imagination. So it's, and I mean, I've been very cautious not to clarify. Many people have questions about Patrick Bateman's state of mind in American Psycho, and I'm continually asked if, is it real or is it, fake? I mean, are these things happening in his head, or does he actually commit these acts? And I knew for myself what I thought, and I can't, I mean, it seems to be so divided, 50%, that I will never say what I truly think about that. But with Glamorama, so don't bother asking that question tonight because it's not going to be answered. But with Glamorama, in order to write a book like Glamorama or American Psycho, I think as a writer you really have to believe that everything that's going on in the book is real, because you are writing these scenes out. And as surreal as some of the sequences might be, as the writer of them, you have to believe they're happening. You have to visualize them happening in order to make it happen when you're writing it down. I mean, so that might be a clue. I don't know, but that's my answer.
What Victor Ward has also in common with Patrick Bateman is the more he wants to be something, the more he is neglected somehow. The more he's not seen, he's become more or less, or he becomes. He's seen everywhere but doesn't remember. He's told all the time, I saw you there, and he denies it. So you get a sense of a doppelganger. But that's not really cleared up. It can also mean that he's been too drugged out, or he can't remember, or he has I don't know. The people were mistaken. But you get a sense of loss of identity more than though he is the it boy of the moment.
Well, I think if you are the it boy of the moment, you do have a loss of identity. And if you are Patrick Bateman, you do have a loss of identity because you're so concerned with fitting in and conforming to what the culture expects of you and what the culture demands of you. And really, to me, that's very significant in the United States, this idea of fitting in, wanting to belong, wanting to be part of a certain group, wanting to rub up against celebrities, people you don't even know, just because they happen to be in magazines and on television and have a nice surface sheen to them. Patrick Bateman to me was the ultimate example of conformity in terms of the suits he bought, the haircut he had, all the things that he thought society deemed important he went for. And I think to a different degree it's the same with Victor Ward. I mean, the idea of dating certain people, not necessarily because you love them, but because they're famous and maybe can give you entree into more famous people, into a different world or a different society. I think it's very emblematic of the culture at large. We might not do it on a literal level every day, but I think those are our fantasies, and that's often what we're forced to confront about ourselves when we read magazines, when we see glamorous people in movies or on television. I mean, I think this is a constant thing that's reinforced with us, as well as this idea that we need to look as good as a Victor Ward or a Patrick Bateman or a Chloe Burns, who's Victor's girlfriend. That idea of the tyranny of physical beauty in the culture, that if you don't look a certain way, you don't have a full head of hair at 60, or you don't have washboard abs when you're you don't have the body of an 18-year-old boy when you're 49 years old. Or for women, the idea that plastic surgery is so important for women who are now in their late 20s and early 30s because they're chasing this impossible ideal that the beauty culture forces on us, are other things that I think a lot about when I work on books like this. And where does that get you, and where do you end up?
But it must be some fascination of yourself, or you have a good research, because I mean the book is crammed with details about names and fashion and products and.
Well, again, that stems really from the narrator. It really does not. I've never really written an autobiographical book, and I think many people assume that all of the skincare creams and the shampoos and the clothes and everything are things that I own, and I'm writing some sort of autobiographical novel about my bathroom or my, toilet case, and it's just not true.
I know about the couch.
Well, the couch is very famous. Yes, this is true. But no, it really stems from the narrator. And if I wrote a book about myself, I'm perfectly happy in many ways with my life. It's very simple. It's very calm. My friends are all people who work in publishing or editors or writers. I do not hang out with models. I don't know anyone really like Victor Ward. And so that sense of detail stems from the character, stems from the narrator, and what I think he would notice and what would be vital to him is what I suppose I researched and what I put into the book. But it doesn't necessarily have anything really to do with my life. And also, that's something that's very down on the scale for me in terms of what I'm interested in doing in the book. Researching, the names of all these obscure bands and ridiculous celebrities and all these products he wants really is kind of boring. I feel it's necessary for Victor, but it's like it rounds him out in a way for me as a character. But that is something that really is the drudge part of the work, the worst part of having to write a book.
Do you write easily? I mean, if you're not distracted by living?
If the book is really going well, and I'm very excited about it, and I'm getting near the midpoint or later on, I tend to work very well and very quickly, and I tend to try to keep a schedule as tightly as possible, and I often try to keep the same hours as my friends who work in offices or do have a job that they go to, and I tend to get up at a certain time, work from 9 until 6 or whatever, and then maybe meet them for dinner or a drink, and then that's pretty much how I do it. It's very simple. It's not based on anything other than that.
With the relief of finishing Glamorama, you must also, I think, perhaps look back on your writing career so far, on what you've written so far. How do you see your own development because I think your first book, of course, when you were about 20 and you write a book, that has some kind of continuity in it. I mean, it has a kind of, you write it without perhaps thinking of writing as a profession in that sense. How things have changed.
They really haven't changed. Writing a novel still comes from some sort of place in me that I can't really verbalize. It's a very intuitive, impulsive act, and it's the same place it comes from that it did with Lesson Zero. And I can't explain it, and I can't locate it, and I don't know why I write. I know authors all the time write these very dreary essays on why I write, as if it's some important, grand thing that they feel they owe to society, and we should exalt them somehow. In many ways, it's a hobby, and it's something you enjoy doing, and you like to do it, and you don't do it for posterity, and you don't do it to build a career. You just happen to like to write.
It's not an obsession.
Well, to a degree, it is an obsession. I mean, it is something you put it this way, it's something I'm compelled to do. And I know that when I finished Glamorama, I vowed that I was not going to work on another book, that it took too long. It was very difficult to concentrate on this book. It was very, very hard for me to write and to complete. And I told myself that I'm not going to work on another book. I'll do something else instead. I'll write screenplays, I'll write journalism, I'll do something to support myself. I don't care what it is. But then I know that 2 months later, this idea for a novel I had had many, many years ago that I kept tinkering with and thinking, how can I write this? And I could never figure out how to do it. I know that 2 months after Glamorama, I was in my kitchen scrambling eggs or making coffee or something, and suddenly, wasn't even thinking about it, suddenly, out of the blue, 2 key questions that I always had about that book were answered. I wasn't even thinking about it, but it came into my head, and I immediately sat down and started to take notes and said, oh, well, okay, if I do that, it's sort of a compulsion, you know. But I can't tell you where that compulsion stems from, and I can't tell you why I do it. I don't know.
You've said that you more or less regretted when the whole uproar started with American Psycho, that you felt the need to distance yourself from the character of Patrick Bateman, apart from denying that you were a serial killer.
Yes, I did.
But somehow the book seems to me that you live the book, and not in a literal sense. I mean, first I regard it as however realistic it is, it seems to be also grotesque somehow, the whole the imagery and but have you changed your do you regret that you well, more or less under pressure distance yourself?
I regret a lot of things, but I don't really necessarily regret that so much. I remember why I did it at the time, because it was just very frightening. The hysteria was so loud in the United States about that book, and you were receiving death threats, and the National Organization of Women wants to ban every book, not only your book, but every book that your publisher is going to publish that year, and you're only 25, 26. You tend to, in a weird way, you want to apologize, and I was very frightened of the reaction that this book had caused, and so I played it very earnest and very safe, and I didn't admit a lot of things that I felt about the book that I now feel, I guess, more comfortable to talk about, because I think the reputation of the book has changed over the last 7 years, and the environment just feels safer to talk about certain things. I mean, I did think that the book was always, when I was working on it, very funny, and I thought it was a piece of black humor, essentially that first and foremost, and it was very hard to tell people that you thought this book that everyone thought was the most evil book in the world was a funny book, and that you had laughed a lot while writing it and thought Patrick Bateman was often quite hilarious, was something that the culture would not allow at that moment, or if I was going to say that, they weren't going to listen. And also the other fact that the book was more autobiographical than I ever let on, not, again, that I was a serial killer, that I murdered anybody, but the fact that in many ways it was an investigation into a kind of superficial life that I felt on many layers that I was living at that time. I was a young man and moved to Manhattan. I had made some money from my first book, my second book, and in a weird way, I was living a kind of 80s yuppie lifestyle that Patrick Bateman was. It was not as extreme, but there were elements in it that increasingly were bothering me, and I was thinking about a lot, and so there was a lot of self-loathing, I suppose, in the creation of American Psycho, because it was criticizing a kind of 80s value, but I think in many ways I was buying into it at a time, and so writing the book in a way was a process for me of distancing myself from it and pulling back from it. So those were just things that at that time were not, I wasn't allowed to admit. That I killed people, so I couldn't admit that either. But
no, I think putting a knife in yourself is a hallmark of good satire. But what I was, I lost my question, I think. Did you have no intuition when you offered the manuscript, that would happen with the book. I mean, not in this this uproar, but that it would be a controversial book.
You know, not at all. I mean, in retrospect, I think that's probably stupid of me, and I should have thought a little bit more clearly that maybe this would have happened. But when I turned in the book, and when the book was finished, my publishers were disappointed. They saw this book. I had told them I was writing a book about a yuppie serial killer, and they got very excited. And I said, oh my God, a yuppie serial killer. This is so trendy of the moment. I can't believe it. This is going to be a huge book. And I turned the book in, and they said, wait a minute. Oh, you mean that it is really going to be about a yuppie serial killer and nobody else? It's just about him. Where's the detective hunting him down? Where's the girl in danger? What happened to the scene at the end of the book where she's dangling off a skyscraper and the yuppie killer's trying to kill her and the detective's about to shoot the yuppie killer? We really thought you were going to turn in a genre novel. And when they got it, they were very disappointed, and they actually cut the, what do you call it, the sales, how much they were going to originally print. And, you know, that was fine with me, whatever. I mean, I'd written the book. I liked the book. I thought it was fine. No one thought it was going to be a controversial book. The publishing house didn't. My agent didn't. And then I went off, and that year, I wrote a lot of journalism, and I was working for magazines. And then about June or July or August of that year, leaks started coming from the publishing house, and there was this rumbling in the press. So it was a surprise, and then it blew out of control later on that year. So no, this was not something that anyone thought would ever have happened. So it was in many ways a total surprise. Yeah.
Something Tyres, what gave you the idea to combine models or ex-models with terrorism in Glamorama, which is something else than a juppie killer?
Well, you know, it wasn't necessarily the fact that I was thinking about combining models and terrorists. It just sort of flowed together, and it just came together while I was outlining the book. And I guess in the end, what I was really thinking about was the connection. It was really about insecurity, and I keep stressing this, the idea that the as I talked about before, how I think that the beauty world and the world of fashion really does make us feel very insecure about ourselves, and makes us care about things that I don't think we normally would. Makes us worried about things in ourselves and about ourselves that we really shouldn't be worrying about. And that sense of insecurity, I think, is very, very damaging to a culture and to people at large. I think the sense of insecurity that terrorism voice upon us was also something that I was thinking about a lot, and I was just making that connection. I mean, I know they bomb airliners and they bomb government offices, but in a sense, that's just an act, and what they really want to do is make you feel very unsafe and worry and think about their cause and what they want. And so those two senses of insecurity, I think, was what I was putting together in Glamorama.
There's the two books, American Psycho and Glamorama, have something which gives the satire hard edge, I think, is a sense I get of disgust with a kind of, well, to use these words, big words, a kind of existential. It's not just superficial, look how superficial this modeling world is. It's not harmless satire, I think. Would you agree?
Yeah, I guess I would, but I think what motivates me as a writer is a satirical impulse, and what motivates me as a writer are things that really maybe do disgust me with society and with contemporary culture, and that's what I'm motivated by. That's what maybe the impulse is to write books like Glamorama or American Psycho or Less Than Zero for that matter. So I suppose I would have to agree with you on that. Maybe I'll be mellowing out a little bit, and maybe that won't be the main impulse the older I get. But I think that's a fair thing to say about the book so far.
Now, after Glamorama, you've started or are about to start a book, a memoir, which seems to be totally different to write about yourself. Yeah.
I mean, I'm working on a memoir that's really about, I don't know if I want to publish it, but it's about my high school years and about my college years. And it's really, it's an exercise for me. I don't know if I want to publish it. It might turn out to be completely terrible, and I really wouldn't want anyone to see it. But I'm writing it because the novel that I kind of figured out how to do is going to be very autobiographical. And I kind of want to rid myself of any autobiographical tendencies before I actually write a fictional book that is autobiographical. I don't know if that makes sense at all. That sounds very fancy and weird to me. But that's, if you can understand what I'm saying. That's
Have you started it yet?
The book?
The memoir.
I've started the memoir and the book, yeah.
Do you find it difficult to write about yourself?
Well, after being on like a very long book tour like this, I find it not so difficult. I find it much more
comforting.
Not comforting exactly, but you know, no, I don't find the memoir that difficult to write. And the novel might be proved to be more difficult. The novel will be more difficult to write, but the memoir, no, so far has not been bad.
Well, I think it's if anyone. Oh, well, perhaps you'd like to read something
Okay.
more, and then afterwards we can you can ask your questions.
This is from near the end of Glamorama. This is the section where Victor, the narrator, first meets his girlfriend and makes some decisions on that day. Sinead O'Connor was singing the last day of our acquaintance, and it was either 11 or 1 or maybe it was 3:15, and we were all lying around Gianni's pool in the big house on Ocean Drive, and there were about 20 of us, and everyone was talking into a cell phone and doing dope, and I had just met Chloe earlier that week. She was lying on a Chase lounge, burning under the sun, and her lips were puffy from collagen injections, and my skull was on fire from a hangover caused by a dozen mango daiquiris, and I was carefully eyeing the 40-carat diamonds she was wearing, and the lemonade I was drinking stung my mouth, and everyone was saying, so what? And there had been a cockroach sighting earlier, and people were basically becoming unglued. There were boys everywhere, slim, full-lipped, big bulged, sucking in their cheeks, and there were also a couple of rock stars and a teenage gay guy from Palestine bragging about a really cool stone throwing he'd attended in Hebron. All of this under a calm gumball blue sky. And Sinead O'Connor was singing the last day of our acquaintance, and a girl lying across from me was positioned in such a way that I could see her anus, and she would reach under her bikini bottom and scratch it, then bring her fingers to her face and lightly smell them. On a huge Bang & Olufsen TV that had been wheeled out, an episode of The X-Files was playing where someone's dog had been eaten by a sea serpent, and for some reason everyone was reading a book called The Amityville Horror and tired from last night's premiere for a new movie called Autopsy 18. The guy hunched over the Ouija board, the girl just back from Madonna's baby shower, the kid playing with a cobra he'd bought with a stolen credit card. A big murder trial was going on that week in which the defense team convinced me that the victim, a 7-year-old girl fatally beaten by her drunken father, was actually guilty of her own death. Mermaids had been spotted during a swim before dawn. Could you kill somebody? I heard a voice ask. A moment passed before another voice answered, yeah, I guess so. Oh, so what? Someone else moaned. Someone walked by with a panting wolf on a leash. And Sinead O'Connor was singing the last day of our acquaintance, and I had spent part of the morning trimming my pubic hair, and everyone was checking various gossip columns to see if they had made it, but they were basically one-shots, and it was never going to happen for any of them. And there was a Rauschenberg in the bathroom, and a Picasso in the pantry, and the guy I had slept with the night before, a boy who looked like Paul Newman at 20, started talking about a friend who had been murdered in Maui last week, and then everyone around the pool joined in, and I couldn't follow the conversation. A tiny rift with a drug dealer, an irate exporter-importer, a run-in with a cannibal? Who knew? Was his death bad? Well, he had been lowered into a barrel of hungry insects. A poll was taken on a scale of 1 to 10, being lowered into a barrel of hungry insects. Opinions were offered. I thought I was going to faint. This conversation was the only indication that anyone here knew anybody else. I lit a cigarette I bummed from River Phoenix. I was just becoming famous, and my whole relationship to the world was about to change. And Sinead O'Connor was seeing the last day of our acquaintance, and someone tossed Pergola the keys to one of the Mercedes parked in the garage, and it was just too hot out, and a jet flew overhead, and I jealously studied a male model's face smirking at me from the cover of a magazine, and the guy I'd slept with the night before whispered to me, "You're a piece of shit." And there was my stunned disbelief, and me saying, so what? And I was so tan my nipples had changed color, and I looked down at my muscled body admiringly, but a fly was dozing on my thigh, and when I brushed it away, it came back and hovered. A Brazilian boy asked me how I got my abs that cubed, and I was so flattered I had to concentrate very seriously in order to answer him. An injured bat had crawled out from beneath a Chase lounge, and it was chirping and flapping its wings uselessly, and a few of the teenage boys stood around it silently. The bat rolled over, upended, and when one of the boys kicked it, the bat screamed. Someone struck it with a branch, and a puff of dust flew off its skin. A light was flickering across the water in the vast pool on Ocean Drive, and I was watching everything through binoculars. A servant brought me a piece of birthday cake and a can of Hawaiian punch, as I had requested. The bat was wriggling on the ground next to a discarded mobile phone. Its spine was broken, and it tried to bite anyone who got near it. The boys continued torturing it. Someone brought out a fork. There was no system to any of this. At that point, Chloe Burns wasn't a real person to me, and on that afternoon in the house on Ocean Drive, a few decisions had to be made, the priority being I would never dream of leaving any of this. At first I was confused by what passed for love in this world. People were discarded because they were too old, or too fat, or too poor, or they had too much hair, or not enough hair, or they were wrinkled, or they had no muscles, no definition, no tone. They weren't hip. They weren't even remotely famous. This was how you chose lovers. This was what decided friends. And I had to accept this if I wanted to get anywhere. When I looked over at Chloe, she shrugged. I observed the shrug. She mouthed the words, "Take a hike." On the verge of tears, because I was dealing with the fact that we lived in a world where beauty was considered an accomplishment, I turned away and made a promise to myself to be harder, to not care, to be cool. The future started mapping itself out, and I focused on it. In that moment, I felt as if I was disappearing from poolside in the villa on Ocean Drive, and I was floating above the palm trees, growing smaller in the wide blank sky until I no longer existed, and relief swept over me with such force I sighed. One of the teenage boys was ready to pounce on me, and the boy splashing in the pool, I realized faintly, could have been drowning and no one would have noticed. I avoided thinking about that and concentrated on the patterns in a bathing suit that Marky Mark was wearing. I might not even remember this afternoon, I was thinking. I was thinking that a part of me might destroy it. A cold voice inside my head begged me to, but I was being introduced to too many cool people, and I was becoming famous. And at that point, I had no way of understanding one thing. If I didn't erase this afternoon from my memory and just walk out that door and leave Chloe Burns behind, sections of this afternoon would come back to me in nightmares. This was what the cold voice assured me. This was what it promised. Someone was praying over the half-smashed bat, but the gesture seemed far away and unimportant. People started dancing around the praying boy. You want to know how this all ends? Chloe asked, eyes closed. I nodded. "By the rights," she whispered. I turned away so she couldn't see the expression on my face. Thanks.
So I'm sure there are a lot of questions that I haven't asked and you are burning to ask. So I think there are two microphones in the, yeah, I see two microphones. So if you would just step up to them and ask your question to Mr. Ellis. First one.
I was one of those fortunate people who have gone to Sarah Lawrence College to study writing. Sarah Lawrence, for a lot of people who don't know what it is, competes with Bennington, where people study to be the most expensive school in the United States, usually is. And I was a scholarship recipient, so I didn't have to pay for it. But my point is, I actually found it to be a very stifling place to study writing, and it has a reputation of being one of the best schools to study writing. I wanted to know if that was your experience at Bennington as well, because I think a lot of similar people go to those schools.
You know, it's a good question because I'm asked so often, and I really didn't realize it until this tour that started in January. I'm constantly asked by younger writers who haven't been published yet for advice. Do you have any advice for a young writer? And I really don't think if you're really writing, you don't need advice. And I really, so I don't. I mean, my glib answer to a writer who asks for advice is marry rich. You know, marry someone rich, and probably will be a lot easier. But I don't. I mean, for me, it didn't really matter where I was. I mean, I knew that I really wanted to be a writer at that point in my career, my life, and I could have been at Bennington. I could have probably been elsewhere, but I still would have written. So I found Bennington stifling in other ways. Definitely socially, it was so small. Everyone knew everyone's business. But in terms of that worrying me or affecting my writing or the place affecting my writing, it didn't. So no.
I just don't quite get, what do you feel personally about this rolling, soulless thing that it's like in the 80s and 90s? Do you want to do you just want to lie back and open your legs to it, or do you want to pull down his trousers and take it up the rib? You know?
I've never been asked that question in quite that way. I've got to say that's quite a unique way of asking that. I think I know what you're talking about. I think I know what you're asking me. I think you're saying that, well, I'm just writing about it. I'm not really offering solutions. I'm asking a lot of questions, but I'm not answering. I'm not solving the problems that I guess I raise in my fiction. And my complaints about those times. I don't necessarily see myself complaining so much really about the 80s or the 90s. I think the things that I tend to complain about are problems in man and society that are just part of our circuitry and part of the way we've created civilization. I really don't think it's so specific. I think the specificity of some of the cultural artifacts that surround my characters, yeah, you could attribute to the 80s or the 90s, but I think the problems, especially the abuse of that rich people have with the freedom that the money gives them, is something that has been down the line a subject in fiction and will probably continue to be. So I don't know, and I've never felt the need to answer certain questions or certain problems that I raise in my fiction. They're, you know, I really don't even think that's my job, and I really don't even think I have the answers. So no. I can't believe I was actually thanked for that answer. That was really quite nice of you to say that. To be thanked for an answer is nice, I guess.
I have a question about your first book. I believe you have written it at the age of 21. I was wondering in what way you were inspired to write a book considering your age.
Well, I did it for a grade. I did it for a class in many ways, and that really helped with the inspiration. But that's I had actually written 3 books previous to Lesson Zero, 3 novels, so I was writing a lot, and I enjoyed doing it. And I remember that I took a tutorial, a writing tutorial with a professor, and we were talking about, well, what should we do in this tutorial? Do you want to do some short stories? What's your idea? And I said, well, I want to try a novel. And he said, fine. Well, why don't you try a novel? And I went back to Los Angeles and I wrote Lesson Zero. The rumors about it that surfaced last fall, I think, in a couple of magazines are true. I did write it under. I was on a crystal meth binge when I worked on the first draft of Lesson Zero. And it was about 1,000 pages long and completely unreadable, and it was quite terrible, which happens if you write on crystal meth. For every page you write sober, on crystal meth you write 20 pages because you're just writing so quickly. And so I vowed, that was a learning point in terms of ever writing on under the influence again. And then I really spent the next 2.5 years editing the book down to its, you know, whatever length it is. So I don't know where the motivation came from really to write that book. I mean, I wanted to write a book at that point that was not autobiographical, that was really about, Clay was going to sum up for me all the feelings I had about my generation. And at that point, a lot of it had to do with passivity. I was thinking about passivity a lot. And to me, that's really the true horror of that book for me when I was writing, is his passivity. It's not the society necessarily, it's his lazy reaction toward it that really bothers me, that he doesn't save the girl from getting raped, that he doesn't help his friend from becoming a prostitute, that he doesn't take action with his girlfriend. These were the things that bothered me a lot about Clay. So the motivation came from a couple places there, I guess.
Thank you very much.
Another question, perhaps from the balcony. You can shout. Perhaps there's a microphone. There's a microphone there. Oh, so feel free, please, wherever you are.
Okay, I have a question. What do you think's the glamorous group today? Do you think it's more the writers, or do you think
of glamorous or not glamorous? And I think the title Glamorama kind of makes fun of the word glamour in a way. It's not something. I mean, I know that's strange to hear, but I don't react to stuff that's glamorous or not. I kind of like things, there are things that interest me, there are things I respond to, but often not because they're glamorous. So I would definitely have to say that writers have never been among the most glamorous members of society, have never been the people that, movie stars and models want in their posse or people to hang out with. Everyone thinks that, oh, in America you must be a well-known writer, so you must be hanging out with supermodels and movie stars all the time. Actually, movie stars and models do not want actors to writers to hang out with them. So writers are never invited to hang out with them, so it doesn't happen. So I never, I don't know, I really don't look at the world that way. I mean, so I can't, I would say right now, I mean, for a period it was the fashion world and it was the modeling world was very glamorous. I think sports are very glamorous in the U.S. right now, and sports stars are often looked as the epitome of celebrity in the culture, and I tend to notice that a lot in the United States, but I don't know what's next.
Thank you.
Next one.
What is your involvement with the Lionsgate production in American Psycho? How do you feel about casting?
You should explain.
Question. please, once again, because...
Oh, the question is, how do I feel about the movie version of American Psycho that actually went into production Monday in Toronto, and what do I feel about the decision of the casting for Patrick Bateman? And am I a part of the movie? Am I involved? I'm not involved with the film version of American Psycho at all. A young, I guess, British actor named Christian Bale is playing the role of Patrick Bateman, and it's written and directed by a woman named Mary Herron, who wrote and directed I Shot Andy Warhol. And it's being shot over the next 6 or 7 weeks in Toronto and New York. I really don't have anything to do with the project. I have read the script. I am friends with everybody on that project. I know the producers, I know the actor, I know Mary, but I'm not involved. The script is very, very faithful to the book. It's about 95% of it is scenes from the book, and about 100% of the dialogue is taken from the book as well. But she has to deliver, I guess what's known in the United States as an R-rated movie. So she really can't shoot the book in many ways. And so it's not as nearly as violent or gory as the book. And what she's concentrated on is really the black humor, focused on this kind of brutish male behavior. And the script is quite funny in that aspect. But I'm sure I'm bound to be disappointed by it, because I'm sure it's, it's not going to be as bad as Lesson Zero, I don't think, but it's going to be... probably, it's probably not going to be my vision of the book. So, and it's been through so many directors and writers and actors over the years that I guess a part of me is just kind of in disbelief that it's actually being shot this time out.
Hi. Actually, my question was somewhat related. How do you feel seeing your books transformed into movies? Do you feel that some of the meaning is lost?
Well, I'm stunned that my books are even optioned for the movies, because they don't have any of the things that you would think that people who make movies want, like a story, a plot, likable characters, happy endings, whatever. I mean, I'm stunned that production companies, and I think all the books I've written so far have been optioned somehow, probably because of whatever the name Bret Easton Ellis means to them. I mean, maybe that has a lot to do with it, but there's nothing in the books that really is inherently filmable, and I don't look at any of my fiction as stuff that would be easily translated to a film. No matter how cinematic the style is, I'm constantly stunned. So, and sure, something's lost because it's a completely different medium. I think people who are big fans of the book of American Psycho will surely be disappointed by the film, because I think what the fans of American Psycho like is inherent in the book. It's something about its bookishness, of its being a novel, and that the strange experience or relationship you have with the novel compared to the experience you have with the film. So I think it's going to be a very different and probably disappointing experience for readers of that book. For people who don't like the book and haven't read the book, it will be a completely different experience. Probably one that's a little puzzling, I would think, for people. I don't know.
Have they optioned Glamorama?
Glamorama is not optioned, and I have no desire to have it optioned. Not at this date. I can't imagine it working as a film at all. It's too complicated and
no
too
one
weird.
To play the celebrities, except the celebrities.
Yeah, the celebrities. Yeah, that's true. But I mean, I don't know. It's not. It would be too long and too expensive, and I really don't think anyone is going to option it. So I don't know.
But you alluded that you might get into script writing?
I had said in this BBC documentary that was made about me called This Is Not an Exit for the South Bank show, at the end of that documentary, they interview me being very tired and haggard, sitting there going, I'm never going to write another book again, I'm never going to write another novel again. And then the interviewer says, well, what will you do, Mr. Ellis? And I said, well, I'm going to go out to Hollywood, I'm going to write screenplays, that's what I'm going to do. And the mistake I made saying that, and the problem with my statement, is that no one invited me to go out to Hollywood to write screenplays. So whatever, there was nothing, 3 months passed and I still wasn't out in Hollywood, there were no offers, so that was a very disingenuous statement. But I tend to write scripts, usually for independent producers and independent film companies, where I'm really rarely paid, or if paid very little. And it's just something I enjoy doing. I like working on that. But studios are never going to hire me to write a script. That will never happen. I just don't have the right sensibility for it.
Another question?
Would I describe Lesson Zero as existentialist? This is the question I always dread during the question and answer period. This is the one that always really frightens me because I'm never smart enough to answer that question. It's always like, I wish I had a really brilliant response to that question, but I never, maybe because I don't know.
Let's talk about drink and drugs then.
No. Well, I'll talk about existentialism. Well, I have to say, when I wrote Lesson Zero, I don't even think I knew how to spell existentialist, let alone know what it meant. I really began that book when I turned 18. Probably in some unconscious way. I guess maybe I was informed by the existentialist movement. I don't know. I've never been a huge fan of the existential. It sounds like I'm talking about a band, the Existentialists. I've never really been a big fan of the Existentialists, but so you know what? I'm going to make it very simple. Yes, I do. I think it is an existentialist novel.
Next question, perhaps up to the balcony. That's surprising. No one has a question? Oh, there.
What? The question is, what authors do I read? Are they American or do they tend to be European? Really, the problem with European writers is that they're very rarely published in the United States. They're translated. And I know that I've met some Dutch writers while I've been here, and I'm disappointed by the fact that I know them and I've met them and I've talked with them, and I can't read their fiction. It's something that's very disappointing to me because American publishers rarely take the chance on translating a lot of foreign writers. I tend to read a lot, of course, mostly American writers. I tend to read everyone who is of my age, of my generation, just because I'm very interested in seeing what they're doing. Not necessarily because I like them so much, but I'm interested in seeing what they have to say. And I read a lot of other books for pleasure. I read a lot of books, a lot of novels. Increasingly, I see nonfiction and biography creeping into my reading list, which really wasn't so true before. It really used to be about 90% fiction. And I guess the older you get, in a way, I don't know, you become less self-absorbed and other lives seem interesting to you instead of your own. And I find myself leaning a lot toward biography, which... From before the war? I would say Hemingway, I'd say Joyce, and I'd say Flaubert. Why? I feel like I'm back in school. This is an oral quiz.
Because they're existentialists.
Well, Hemingway for his Hemingway because his style seemed very, it made a big impression on me as a young man, and it seemed very easy to mimic and to copy. And of course, you try to, and you realize that it's not at all. And I think that was why I was first interested in Hemingway as a high school student. Joyce because of the lack of boundaries, the freedom that a book like Ulysses, proved to me that there were no boundaries in fiction. You could pretty much do whatever you want, and that's very liberating. It's an incredibly liberating novel to read for that reason. And Flaubert, because of the sense of detail and his strict aesthetic, is something that I admire very much. The accumulation of detail, and also I guess a sense of social reportage that I find in his books that really made a big impact on me. Sentimental education more than anything else. Whew.
Hello.
Okay.
On the balcony, I have a question.
Gore Vidal. What about Gore Vidal? You know, it's interesting. Gore Vidal says the nicest things about me, and I've read a lot of what he's written, and I like him very much, and I envy his career. I think he's got one of the greatest American literary careers that in the history of American literature, but I don't know if I'm really a huge fan of his work. I think he's a brilliant essayist, and I think he's probably one of the smartest American writers that's still living. But I often find his fiction in many ways doesn't speak to me, and I don't know why. So I find that odd, but he has been a big supporter of mine, and I feel kind of guilty about saying that. I probably should just say I love all of his work, and he's up there with everyone else, but no, so...
Hi.
Finally.
I was already screaming before. Well, I was a bit worried. I only read American Psycho, and there was a lot of cruelty in it. So I just was wondering that, I wrote it down. Is this cruelty in this book, is it like a reflection of the society as you see it, or? That was the question.
What was what's the question?
The violence in, if I
Yeah,
may say,
you
the
were
violence and cruelty in American Psycho
Okay.
Comes out of your view of society. Or, and then the question stops. Perhaps, or are you a serial killer yourself? But, but that takes the first part.
No, because you were saying before that that you're just taking everything, because you're not a psycho killer, I get that.
No.
But because you're looking at your surroundings, at the people of your own age, and writing about these comments on the society as it is, and then I thought, well, why is it so pornographic, cruel? Do you know?
Yes, I know. I don't know. I mean, I don't, you know, what do yeah,
Maybe
it's
not really a
a very interesting question. It's a very tough question to answer. I mean, what is it, yeah, I don't know. I mean, okay, does anyone have it?
I believe.
Okay. I just find that a very hard question to answer. I don't know what it's really about. What is the question? The question is really,
Well, perhaps where
if you clarify it for me, I could answer, I suppose. If you could clarify it for me, the question.
Yeah, perhaps where the violence and cruelty in American Psycho, and perhaps also in less so in Glamorama, what do you, well, to put it crudely, what do you mean with it as a writer by it? What is your purpose with it? What does it represent to you? I think that's the question you want to ask.
Okay. Patrick Bateman is a serial killer. And many of the characters in Glamorama are terrorists. I am not interested in violence in my own life. I am not interested. The older I get, I wince in pain when I see an atrocity in a newspaper photograph or when I see violent movies. It has never been something that I have been interested in as a person. I have lately, but not anymore, but for 2 books, was very interested in writing about a person who happened to be a serial killer, and in Glamorama, people who were terrorists. Simply put, it stems from them. I did not set out to write a violent book, and I'm not necessarily interested in writing about violence per se. I just happen to have written about characters who commit violent acts. And there are 20 other things that are much more interesting to me in a novel that I'm working on, rather than how to deal with the violence and how the violence is going to, what it represents, or if it's a part of me, or where does it stem from in my psyche. It really, very simply put, has to do with the characters I've chosen to write about. And I really don't see in the future having that play a part in my fiction anymore. It plays a part in these 2 books, but I don't, and maybe 1 or 2 stories in The Informers. But beyond that, no. It doesn't come from any place weirder than that. It's just that I want to stay true to these characters.
I want to ask something. Why does Patrick Bateman come back in your new book, Glamorama? Is it just a joke, or was it on purpose?
Patrick, it was a joke. It was a cheap gimmick. I wanted him to have said the sentence to a girl, I like to keep abreast of things, and I wanted him to say that, and I forgot to put it in American Psycho. And when I began writing Glamorama, I said it has to be in there, so that's why I came back. No other reason than that. No other reason.
That's also the character you stole from your friend and colleague Jay McInerney, Alison Poole, he's beaten and has toothpaste all over her face in an American Psycho, I think. Sorry?
I said it's not a fact, it's an homage.
Yeah, well, of course.
I think, well...
Is it an homage?
Alison Poole's appearance in American Psycho, she's a character from Jay's book, Story of My Life. You know, it's really not an homage. It was, that character was named something else when I wrote that passage. And Jay did something to me that week that really pissed me off and really made me angry. And I changed the name to Alison Poole because he had left me, I think he left me with a bar bill Well, that was very expensive at a club one night, and I got mad. I immediately went home and changed her name to Alison Poole, and so it was not an homage. It was revenge. It was revenge.
Well, perhaps the last question.
Okay.
You say you just changed the name Alison Poole, but you changed more of it. Likes for horses, I gather, in American Psycho.
Because she goes to the Kentucky Derby, and that was added in. The fact that they go to the Kentucky Derby rather than
But in Spring you use more. Now in Glamorama we meet Vistor and the whole cast of Rules of Attraction and Alison Poole and more people like that. The same thing happened at American Psycho, where we meet Sean Bateman again. But what's more important is, in American Psycho, I found out that you, was it a prank that you just copied whole scenes or chapters from other novels?
Actually, that's a rumor. That's not true. I mean, I haven't. I would like to know what those novels are.
Oh, I can.
No! They're whole scenes from chapters from my novels.
Your own novels.
Earlier novels, yes. There are about 4 or 5 chapters in American Psycho that are taken from my other novels, and I was very conscious of that. Yes, that's true. I did do that. It was a very bad week of writing. I really couldn't think of anything, and I stole from myself. I mean, I can't. And I thought, well, this sounds pretty good. Who's going to notice, you know? And I really wish I could give you a better answer. But often when you're writing, you don't have such a strict philosophy. And often it's very playful. And I find myself playing little games and little jokes. And, you know, it helps keep you amused. It helps get you through the process. So I would love to give you a very fancy theory about why I did that.
About postmodernism and having samples.
I don't know. I really don't know. I mean, I know it might be a disappointment to some people, but I really don't know how much. I really write in many ways from an unconscious and from an emotional area and from a passionate area, and I don't know if I could label my books as postmodern myself and figure out why. Often the questions I get are very, very intelligent about my novels, much more intelligent than any answers that I can supply. It really does happen. And often if I hear an intelligent response, I will steal that response and use it at another question and answer reading. So that's usually how it is. But
The final question, I'm still standing here, so it's easy for me. I just read that Leonardo DiCaprio won't play Patrick Bateman, and now Christian Bale is going to do it. Is that true?
Yes, Christian Bale.
Did you know this already? Because in Glamorama you used a Patrick Bale kind of type.
There's a character who Victor Ward refers to as the Christian Bale character. That was written before Christian Bale was cast. And I remember the day I wrote about the Christian Bale guy that keeps helping Victor and Victor keeps seeing. I read that somewhere he had the most, on the internet, that he had the most websites of any actor. I thought that was so strange because he's not in that many movies. Why is he so popular on the internet? So I thought he'd be a great person to name the Christian Bale guy. And then when he got cast in the movie American Psycho, I cut Christian Bale out, and I made him like the Matt Dillon guy or something like that. I forgot what. And then when Christian Bale was fired and Leonardo DiCaprio came in, I went back and changed it back to the Christian Bale guy. And then when Leonardo DiCaprio walked off the set and they brought Christian Bale back in, the book was published. And there was nothing I could do.
Well, I'm happy you didn't make it a Dustin Hoffman type, because I wouldn't see Dustin Hoffman as Patrick Bateman. So thank you for that.
You're very welcome. Thank you. Oh.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'll keep this introduction short because I gather there will not be many people tonight that are not familiar with the works of Bret Easton Ellis. Many of you will have read his first novel, Less Than Zero, when it appeared in 1985, I think, when its author was in his early 20s. Its shockingly bleak portrayal of a group of rich teenagers in their soulless search for drugs and sex in Los Angeles made it one of the most publicized novels of that decade. But other than most hyped novels, Less Than Zero really touched a nerve with a whole generation. And some 14 years later, after its publication, it has easily outlived most of the so-called Lost Generation novels it was originally grouped with. Why is that? The hype and scandal that has surrounded Ellis' work from the beginning on has tended to obscure what is obvious to anyone who actually reads it. that he is a writer deeply committed to his own work, and easily the most radical voice in American fiction today. One of the most telling paradoxes that haunts this writer is that with every new novel he is accused of mindless superficiality or cheap tendency to shock. In other words, that he is too much implicated in his own superficial subject matter. Only after all the negative publicity has died down, readers and critics slowly start to discover what that novel is all about. This has happened with practically all his books, with Less Than Zero, with The Rules of Attraction, and it is happening now again with his new novel, Glamorama. But clearly the work which has most suffered from this, of course, is American Psycho, which appeared in 1990 and caused an instant uproar. Publishers, critics and activists alike made this book out as if it had been written by the devil himself, not a novel at all, but only endless descriptions of mechanical sex and clinically detailed scenes of slaughter and human vivisection. The critics that wouldn't allow themselves to confess that they were shocked just called the book dull and badly written. Naturally, the scandal surrounding it made the book a big success, and easily the most talked about novel of the 90s. But its importance and sheer originality has only gradually become clear. Today the book reads as a brilliant satire, not only of 80s American yuppie culture with its shiny surface and its dark other side, but also, and in my view more importantly, as a satire of a mass society in which a sense of personal identity has all but disappeared and has been replaced by an outside world of services. The fading of the boundaries between reality and the imagination, the projection of an inner world on the outer world, bring with it the absurdly real fantasies of sexual violence that fill the existence and mind of Patrick Bateman. In that sense, American Psycho tells us more about modern society than a celebrated futurist novel like 1984 has ever done. For one thing, its claustrophobia strikes me as more realistic. In more than one sense, that novel has already become a classic. It's easy to sneer at the detractors of Ellis' work, who can't or won't see beneath the glittering surface of his work, but the truth is that Ellis himself remains an elusive writer. Even his most fervent admirers don't seem to be able to decide if he's driven by nihilism or moralism. And Bret Easton Ellis is not the kind of writer who provides theories and interpretations to his own work. Profiles of him in magazines usually devote countless words on his appearance and behavior and preferences. There are endless discussions about the furniture in an apartment. The big news last year was that he bought a couch, or the lack of it, and what it all means. But the work itself is more often than not merely glossed over. While he obviously suffers from the often brutal verbal attacks on his books and personality, and when the scandal about American Psycho was at its height, he kindly took the trouble to point out that he himself was no sadistic serial killer, he seems aware that it's dangerous for a serious writer to explain himself too much. At times he seems to be very much part of the world of glamour he so chillingly describes. At others he appears as an aloof, almost visionary moralist, almost too deeply aware of the moral vacuum that lies in the heart of the modern Western world. His books don't explain themselves, and I'm thankful for that. They have no clear moral tact on them by their writer. They don't offer easy or sentimental home truth about the human condition. So you can well imagine how glad I am that Mr. Ellis accepted the invitation of the John Adams Institute to talk about his new novel Glamorama, which has just appeared in a Dutch translation. We will discuss the new book exhaustively, but first Mr. Ellis will read the first of two passages he has chosen. Our talk will last about 20 minutes, and after Mr. Ellis has read again to us, please feel free to ask him the questions you always wanted him to ask him, but never thought you would get the chance of asking him personally. Mr. Ellis, may I ask you up to...
Thank you very much. I mean, I don't know quite how to live up to an introduction like that. That was very, very nice. I'm going to read just for about Oh, it's okay. This is better? This one? I'm going to read from this new novel, Glamorama, just for about 5 or 6 minutes, and then when I talk to him, we'll have an interview, and then I'll read another passage. The 2 passages I'm going to read tonight, well, the problem is that in a book, this is the first book that I've had a problem reading out loud from in front of audiences, because usually I like to jump around a book and read from certain places in a book, and the problem with this book, I found through trial and error during my book tour, is that this is the first book I've written that has a plot, that has a story of some kind, and it's very difficult to read passages from the book later on and have to explain to the audience constantly what I'm talking about. So the 2 passages I'll read tonight, the first one right now, concern the the narrator's relationship with his girlfriend, which is falling apart. And the first section I'll read is from the last time they had a vacation together, and then the second section I'll read later on will be from the first time they met. This book is narrated by a man named Victor Ward, who is, I suppose, what you would call the it boy of the moment in Manhattan, a male model who is famous for being famous, for hanging around famous people, really famous for no accomplishment on his own. And I'm just going to read, and then I'll talk to Boston. We'll continue this. So this is from Glamorama. This is a section about when him and his girlfriend went on vacation. Chloe and I went to LA last September for reasons we never really figured out, though in retrospect I think it had something to do with trying to save our relationship. And Chloe was supposed to be a presenter at the MTV Awards, which I remember nothing of except Oscar talk, Frida Kahlo talk, Mr. Jenkins talk, how big is Dweezil Zappa's dick talk, Sharon Stone wearing pajamas, Edgar Bronfman Jr. coming on to Chloe, only 2 green juji fruits in the box I held while spacing out during the ceremony, and it was all really just Cindy, 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 and in every photo printed of me, in W, in Us, in Rolling Stone, I am holding the same half-empty bottle of Evian. We stayed at the Chateau Marmont in a giant suite with a balcony twice its size overlooking West LA. When Chloe didn't want to talk, she'd rush to the bathroom, turn on the hairdryer full blast, and point it toward my calm, bewildered face. Her nickname for me during those weeks out there was my little zombie. I tried out for it and didn't get the part of a drug addict's friend in a medical drama pilot that ultimately was never produced, but it didn't really matter. Since I was so out of it, I even had to reread things Paula Abdul said in interviews. Chloe was always dying of thirst. There were always tickets for some lame-o screening. Our conversations were always garbled. The streets were always, inexplicably, covered with confetti. We were always at barbecues at Herb Ritz, which were always attended by either Madonna or Josh Brolin or Amy Locan or Veronica Webb or Stephen Dorff or Ed L'Amato or Richard Gere or Layla Roshan or Ace of Base, where turkey burgers were always served, which we always washed down with pink grapefruit iced tea, and bonfires were always lit throughout the city, along with the giant cones of Klieg lights announcing premieres. When we went to an AIDS fundraiser thrown by Lily Tartikoff at Barney's, cameras flashed, and Chloe's dry hand clenched my limp hand, and she squeezed it only once, a warning, when a reporter from E! Television asked me what I was doing there, and I said I needed an excuse to wear my new Versace tuxedo. I could barely make it up a series of steep staircases to the top floor, but once I was there, Christian Slater gave me a high five, and we hung out with Dennis Leary, Helen Hunt, Billy Zane, Joelle Fisher, Claudia Schiffer, Matthew Fox. Someone pointed someone else out to me and whispered, the piercing didn't take. Before melting back into the crowd, people talked about cutting off their hair and burning their fingernails. Most people were mellow and healthy, tan and buff, and drifting around. Others were so hysterical, sometimes covered with lumps and bruises, that I couldn't understand what they were saying to me. So I tried to stay close to Chloe to totally make sure she didn't fall back into any destructive habits. And she wore capri pants and Kamali makeup, canceled aromatherapy appointments that I was unaware she had made. Her diet dominated by grape and lemongrass and root beer flavored granitas. Chloe didn't return phone calls from Evan Dando, Robert Town, Don Simpson, Victor Dre, Frank Mancuso Jr., Shane Black. She was bawling constantly and bought a print by Frank Gehry for something like 30 grand and an Ed Ruscha fog painting for considerably more. Chloe bought Lucien Gau's Shogun table lamps and a lot of iron baskets and had it all shipped back to Manhattan. Rejecting people was the hot pastime. We had a lot of sex. Everyone talked about the year 2018. One day we pretended to be ghosts. Danny Jansen wanted to take us to mysterious places, and I was asked by 4 separate people what my favorite land animal was, and since I didn't know what these were, I couldn't even fake an answer. Hanging out with two of the Beastie Boys at a house in Silver Lake, we met a lot of crew-cut blondes and Tamara Davis and Gray Kinnear and David Fincher and Perry Farrell. Yum, ice was a constant refrain while we drank lukewarm Bacardi and Cokes and bitched about taxes. In the backyard, a pool that had been drained was filled with rubble, and the Chase lounges had empty syringes scattered all over them. The only question I asked during dinner was, why don't you just grow your own? From where I stood, I watched someone take 10 minutes to cut a slice of cheese. There was a topiary in the shape of Elton John in the backyard next to the rubble-strewn pool. We were eating Vicodin and listening to Nico-era Velvet Underground tapes. Hey, baby, the petty ugliness of our problems seems so ridiculous in the face of all this natural beauty, I said to Chloe. Baby, that's an Elton John topiary behind you, Chloe said. Back at the chateau, CDs were scattered all over the suite, and empty Federal Express packages littered the floor. The word miscellany seemed to sum up everything we felt about each other, or so Chloe said. We had fights at Chai Brasserie, 3 in the Beverly Center, one later in Le Colonial at a dinner for Nick Cage, another at House of Blues. We kept telling each other it didn't matter, that we didn't care, fuck it, which was actually pretty easy to do. During one of our fights, Chloe called me a peon who had about as much ambition as a parking lot attendant. She wasn't right, she wasn't wrong. If we were stuck in the suite of the chateau after a fight, there was really no place left to go, either the kitchen or the balcony, where 2 parrots named Blinky and Scrubby, the gibbering idiot, hung out. She lay in bed in her underwear, light from the TV flooding the darkened suite, the Cocteau twins droning from the stereo, and during these lulls, I would wander out by the pool and chew gum and drink Fruitopia while reading an old issue of Film Threat or the book Final Exit, rereading a chapter titled Self-Deliverance via the Plastic Bag. We were in a non-zone. 10 or 11 producers were found dead in various Bel Air mansions that week. I autographed the back of a Jones matchbook in my nearly indecipherable scrawl for some young thing. I mused about publishing my journal entries in details. There was a sale at Maxfield's, but we had no patience. We ate tamales in empty skyscrapers and ordered bizarre hand rolls in sushi bars done up in industrial chic decor in restaurants with names like Muse, Fusion, Buffalo Club, with people like Jack Nicholson, Ann Magnuson, Los Lobos, Sean McPherson, a 14-year-old male model named Dragonfly, who Jimmy Rip really dug. We spent too much time at the Four Seasons bar and not enough at the beach. A friend of Chloe's gave birth to a dead baby. I left ICM. People told us that they either were vampires or knew someone who was a vampire. Drinks with Depeche Mode. So many people we vaguely knew died or disappeared the weeks we were there. Car accidents, AIDS, murders, overdoses, run over by a truck, fell into vats of acid or maybe were pushed. That the amount for funeral wreaths on Chloe's visa was almost $5,000. I looked really great. Thanks. Thank you.
Well, I know you must have been intellectually exhausted because you just survived Paul de Leeuw show, but...
Intellectually exhausted from the Paul de Leeuw show? I thought it was actually quite a nice way to be welcomed to Amsterdam. I mean, to have Paul de Leeuw flirt with you for 12 minutes was actually not a bad experience as far as, bad experiences go, I suppose. It was all right.
Well, we'll just have a free-flowing conversation from now on. Leave the intellectual heavy stuff behind us. From what I've read about it, I get the impression that finishing Glamorama was nothing short of a kind of personal liberation to you. Is that true?
Well, since it took so long to complete, and I began the book in at the end of 1989, and I finished it about 8 years later, yes, it ended up being something that surprised me because once I was done with it, I felt like a much stronger person. I felt like I had much more confidence, and a lot of insecurity I had before about certain aspects of my life fell away. And not necessarily because there was any material in here that was so personal and I was so involved with, but just the sheer act of finishing this long book I felt better when I finished it, I have to admit, and I didn't think that was going to happen, but it did.
Did that have to do that you've proven that there was life for your writing after American Psycho?
Well, you know, the American Psycho controversy did not ever make me doubt being a writer. It made me doubt a lot of other things. It might have made me doubt the intelligence of certain people. It maybe made me doubt a sense of safety in the world, and especially the publishing world, where before I'd been taken very good care of. I was like this little boy who was always the youngest person at the table, and then American Psycho came out, and I was booted from the table, was not invited, to join anybody for meals anymore. But at that time, I mean, that part of my life and my writing life were always kept very separate. And as I said before, I mean, I had started Glamorama before American Psycho was published, and my confidence in a way about the actual writing of books and whatever horrible things or problems I've had in my life often don't affect that. So I can't say I can connect the two really so much.
Looking back, can you say why it took so long for you to finish? I mean, it's a long book, but...
It is a long book, and I've been telling people for a long time that it took about 8 years to write. In actuality, if I really had to say how long it took during those 8 years, I would say more like 4.5 or 5 years. Basically what happened was it began with the American Psycho controversy. I'd been about 100 pages into Glamorama when the controversy about American Psycho began, and it was so distracting that I took about a year off from writing it because I couldn't concentrate. And then once I got back into writing Glamorama, my father suddenly died and left a very complicated and messy estate where he owed a lot of debts, and I was the executor of his will, and I had to go to court and fight off creditors and people like that. And then once that was all over, I began writing the book again, and then a long-term relationship I'd been in broke up, and that was very distracting. And then I mean, the list goes on. I mean, I published The Informers because I owed a book to my publisher, and so they published a book of short stories of mine, and then I had I would say probably a couple problems with drugs and alcohol that definitely hampered the completion of Glamorama. So you put all those things together, and you've got quite a decade, actually, when I think about it. A lot of stuff happened. That was a very complicated time. So
now I understand why you find it a liberation that it's finished. The book is there. How do you write? I mean, do you a book like you just told the audience that it's the first book you actually used a plot, and it's a very intricate plot, so intricate that most critics don't get it.
I don't know if I get it. I mean, I'm not sure if I fully understand, but no.
But well, in this case, do you had you done all the plotting beforehand?
Yeah, the book was very carefully outlined beforehand, and it wasn't as if I had a conscious desire to write a book with a plot. I actually wanted to write a book that was about a conspiracy, and I think from that conspiracy that's really at the heart of Glamorama, a plot flowed from that. And I realized, well, if I'm going to write a book with a conspiracy, you're going to have to somehow explain it, and that does entail storytelling and narrative, two things that I really had not been interested in before. Two things that I had always felt as a much younger writer were very artificial and phony and didn't belong in a book. And my concerns were much more, I guess, almost journalistic or reportage, investigating a world, just going in there and following a character around aimlessly for 200 or 300 pages. And there was the truth. That a plot would intrude upon that honesty of the vision. I don't agree with that anymore, and I feel much differently now about writing a novel and constructing a novel than I did when I was in my 20s, and I wrote actually all my novels when I was in my 20s. So, yeah.
Because Victor Ward is a character with a development, you could say. He even splits. I mean, but he's really. The plot actually comes as a surprise, because the first 180 pages, more or less. They have this manic quality of the fragment you just read, the passage you just read, and then it goes to Europe, and the novel becomes a transatlantic novel, and then the plot goes. How do you see Victor Ward?
Well, I just realized sitting here that out of all my novels, in the end, the person I'm most compassionate toward is my stupidest narrator, my dumbest narrator, and it just dawned on me that the other books I was very harsh and judgmental toward their personas and very unsympathetic to the plights they found themselves in, and that includes Clay in Lesson Zero, and I suppose the college students in Rules of Attraction, and definitely Patrick Bateman in American Psycho. But there is a sense of compassion for Victor in this book that I don't know what the connection is between his being such an airhead and so out of it, and then my feeling quite bad for him in the end, and relating to his panic and his paranoia and his anxiety as his world gets increasingly violent and screwed up. But Victor Ward really began for me as a summation of everything that bothered me about a lot of men I knew of my generation, and a certain attitude I saw in my generation of men in the States. Preoccupation with celebrity, vanity, and intense narcissism, a kind of hip attitude that flattened out all other emotions, an obsession with superficial things, finding the truth in surfaces and believing surfaces, and all of that stuff was where Victor Ward began. And in many ways, Victor Ward to me is a summation of a lot of issues I guess I have with my generation, I suppose, and that's where the character really was, how he was created.
In some respects, he seems to resemble Patrick Bateman in the sense that he is. This is my interpretation. You don't agree with that, but the tension between his outward way of living, the way he wants to be, and the truth about his position, creates the tension between his inward life and the outside. What he wants to be tends to create a lot of violent fantasies. I mean, in Glamorama, it's not very clear if the plot, the whole conspiracy, is in Victor's head, or is real, or is filmed, is a film. I mean, you confuse the issue magnificently. So that's something that he has in common with Patrick Bateman, I think. The irreality of some scenes, people who are dead who are become alive again. This whole dislocation of reality.
Well, I can make this very easy for you. Everything that happens in the book is real. Actually, everything that happens, it's not in his head, is no figment of his imagination. So it's, and I mean, I've been very cautious not to clarify. Many people have questions about Patrick Bateman's state of mind in American Psycho, and I'm continually asked if, is it real or is it, fake? I mean, are these things happening in his head, or does he actually commit these acts? And I knew for myself what I thought, and I can't, I mean, it seems to be so divided, 50%, 50%, that I will never say what I truly think about that. But with Glamorama, so don't bother asking that question tonight because it's not going to be answered. But with Glamorama, in order to write a book like Glamorama or American Psycho, I think as a writer you really have to believe that everything that's going on in the book is real, because you are writing these scenes out. And as surreal as some of the sequences might be, as the writer of them, you have to believe they're happening. You have to visualize them happening in order to make it happen when you're writing it down. I mean, so that might be a clue. I don't know, but that's my answer.
What Victor Ward has also in common with Patrick Bateman is the more he wants to be something, the more he is neglected somehow. The more he's not seen, he's become more or less, or he becomes. He's been everywhere but doesn't remember. He's told all the time, I saw you there, and he denies it. So you get a sense of a doppelganger. But that's not really cleared up. It can also mean that he's been too drugged out, or he can't remember, or he has I don't know. The people were mistaken. But you get a sense of loss of identity more than though he is the it boy of the moment.
Well, I think if you are the it boy of the moment, you do have a loss of identity. And if you are Patrick Bateman, you do have a loss of identity because you're so concerned with fitting in and conforming to what the culture expects of you and what the culture demands of you. And really, to me, that's very significant in the United States, this idea of fitting in, wanting to belong, wanting to be part of a certain group, wanting to rub up against celebrities, people you don't even know just because they happen to be in magazines and on television and have a nice surface sheen to them. Patrick Bateman to me was the ultimate example of conformity in terms of the suits he bought, the haircut he had, all the things that he thought society deemed important he went for. And I think to a different degree it's the same with Victor Ward. I mean, the idea of dating certain people, not necessarily because you love them, but because they're famous and maybe can give you entree into more famous people, into a different world or a different society. I think it's very emblematic of the culture at large. We might not do it on a literal level every day, but I think those are our fantasies, and that's often what we're forced to confront about ourselves when we read magazines, when we see glamorous people in movies or on television. I mean, I think this is a constant thing that's reinforced with us, as well as this idea that we need to look as good as a Victor Ward or a Patrick Bateman or a Chloe Burns, who's Victor's girlfriend. That idea of the physical, the tyranny of physical beauty in the culture, that if you don't look a certain way, you don't have whatever a full head of hair at 60, or you don't have whatever washboard abs when you're like, you don't have the body of an 18-year-old boy when you're like 49 years old. Or for women, the idea that plastic surgery is so important for women who are now in their late 20s and early 30s because they're chasing this impossible ideal that the beauty culture forces on us, are other things that I think a lot about when I work on books like this. And where does that get you, and where do you end up?
But it must be some fascination of yourself, or you have a good research, because the book is crammed with details about names and fashion and products. And
well, again, that stems really from the narrator. It really does not. I've never really written an autobiographical book, and I think many people assume that all of the skincare creams and the shampoos and the clothes and everything are things that I own, and I'm writing some sort of autobiographical novel about my bathroom or my, toilet case, and it's just not true.
We know about the couch.
Well, the couch is very famous. Yes,
yes,
this is true. But no, it really stems from the narrator. And if I wrote a book about myself, I'm perfectly happy in many ways with my life. It's very simple. It's very calm. My friends are all people who work in publishing or editors or writers. I do not hang out with models. I don't know anyone really like Victor Ward. And so that sense of detail stems from the character, stems from the narrator, and what I think he would notice and what would be vital to him is what I suppose I researched and what I put into the book. But it doesn't necessarily have anything really to do with my life. And also, that's something that's very down on the scale for me in terms of what I'm interested in doing in the book. Researching, the names of all these obscure bands and ridiculous celebrities and all these products he wants really is kind of boring. I feel it's necessary for Victor, but it's like it rounds him out in a way for me as a character. But that is something that really is the drudge part of the work, the worst part of having to write a book.
Do you write easily? If you're not distracted by living?
If the book is really going well, and I'm very excited about it, and I'm getting near the midpoint or later on, I tend to work very well and very quickly, and I tend to try to keep a schedule as tightly as possible, and I often try to keep the same hours as my friends who work in offices or do have a job that they go to, and I tend to get up at a certain time, work from 9 until 6 or whatever, and then maybe meet them for dinner or a drink, and then that's pretty much how I do it. It's very simple. It's not based on anything other than that.
With the relief of finishing Glamorama, you must also, I think, perhaps look back on your writing career so far, on what you've written so far. How do you see your own development because I think your first book, of course, when you were about 20 and you write a book, that has some kind of continuity in it. It has a kind of, you write it without perhaps thinking of writing as a profession in that sense. Right. How things have changed?
They really haven't changed. Writing a novel still comes from some sort of place in me that I can't really verbalize. It's a very intuitive, impulsive act. And it's the same place it comes from that it did with Lesson Zero. And I can't explain it, and I can't locate it. And I don't know why I write. I know authors all the time write these very dreary essays on why I write, as if it's some important, grand thing that they feel they owe to society, and we should exalt them somehow. In many ways, it's a hobby, and it's something you enjoy doing, and you like to do it, and you don't do it for posterity, and you don't do it to build a career. You just happen to like to write.
It's not an obsession.
Well, to a degree, it is an obsession. It is something you put it this way, it's something I'm compelled to do. And I know that when I finished Glamorama, I vowed that I was not going to work on another book, that it took too long. It was very difficult to concentrate on this book. It was very, very hard for me to write and to complete. And I told myself that I'm not going to work on another book. I'll do something else instead. I'll write screenplays, I'll write journalism, I'll do something to support myself. I don't care what it is. But then I know that 2 months later, this idea for a novel I had had many, many years ago that I kept tinkering with and thinking, how can I write this? And I could never figure out how to do it. I know that 2 months after Glamorama, I was in my kitchen scrambling eggs or making coffee or something, and suddenly, wasn't even thinking about it, suddenly, out of the blue, 2 key questions that I always had about that book were answered. I wasn't even thinking about it, but it came into my head, and I immediately sat down and started to take notes and said, oh, well, okay, if I do that, it's sort of a compulsion, you know. But I can't tell you where that compulsion stems from, and I can't tell you why I do it. I don't know.
You've said that you more or less regretted when the whole uproar started with American Psycho, that you felt the need to distance yourself from the character of Patrick Bateman, apart from denying that you were a serial killer. But somehow the book seems to me that you live the book, and not in a literal sense. I mean, first I regard it as however realistic it is, it seems to be also grotesque somehow, the whole the imagery and but have you changed your do you regret that you were more or less under pressure distance yourself?
You know, I regret a lot of things, but I don't really necessarily regret that so much. I remember why I did it at the time, because it was just very frightening. The hysteria was so loud in the United States about that book, and you know, you were receiving death threats, and the National Organization of Women wants to ban every book, not only your book, but every book that your publisher is going to publish that year, and you're only 25, 26. You tend to, in a weird way, you want to apologize, and I was very frightened of the reaction that this book had caused, and so I played it very earnest and very safe, and I didn't admit a lot of things that I felt about the book that I now feel, I guess, more comfortable to talk about, because I think the reputation of the book has changed over the last 7 years, and the environment just feels safer to talk about certain things. I mean, I did think that the book was always, when I was working on it, very funny, and I thought it was a piece of black humor, essentially that first and foremost, and it was very hard to tell people that you thought this book that everyone thought was the most evil book in the world was a funny book, and that you had laughed a lot while writing it and thought Patrick Bateman was often quite hilarious, was something that the culture would not allow at that moment, or if I was going to say that, they weren't going to listen. And also the other fact that the book was more autobiographical than I ever let on, not, again, that I was a serial killer, that I murdered anybody, but the fact that in many ways it was an investigation into a kind of superficial life that I felt on many layers that I was living at that time. I was a young man who moved to Manhattan. I had made some money from my first book, my second book, and in a weird way, I was living a kind of 80s yuppie lifestyle that Patrick Bateman was. It was not as extreme, but there were elements in it that increasingly were bothering me, and I was thinking about a lot, and so there was a lot of self-loathing, I suppose, in the creation of American Psycho, because it was criticizing a kind of 80s value, but I think in many ways I was buying into it at a time, and so writing the book in a way was a process for me of distancing myself from it and pulling back from it. So those were just things that at that time were not, I wasn't allowed to admit. That I kill people, so I couldn't admit that either. But
no, I think putting a knife in yourself is a hallmark of good satire. But what I was, I've lost my question, I think. Did you have no intuition when you offered the manuscript that would happen with the book? I mean, not in this uproar, but that it would be a controversial book.
Not at all. I mean, in retrospect, I think that's probably stupid of me, and I should have thought a little bit more clearly that maybe this would have happened. But when I turned in the book, and when the book was finished, my publishers were disappointed. They saw this book. I had told them I was writing a book about a yuppie serial killer, and they got very excited. And I said, oh my God, a yuppie serial killer. This is so trendy of the moment. I can't believe it. This is going to be a huge book. And I turned the book in, and they said, wait a minute. Oh, you mean that it is really going to be about a yuppie serial killer and nobody else? It's just about him. Where's the detective hunting him down? Where's the girl in danger? What happened to the scene at the end of the book where she's dangling off a skyscraper and the yuppie killer's trying to kill her and the detective's about to shoot the yuppie killer? We really thought you were going to turn in a genre novel. And when they got it, they were very disappointed, and they actually cut the, sales, how much they were going to originally print. And, you know, that was fine with me, whatever. I mean, I'd written the book. I liked the book. I thought it was fine. No one thought it was going to be a controversial book. The publishing house didn't. My agent didn't. And then I went off, and that year, I wrote a lot of journalism. And I was working for magazines. And then about June or July or August of that year, leaks started coming from the publishing house, and there was this rumbling in the press. So it was a surprise. And then it blew out of control later on that year. So no, this was not something that anyone thought would ever have happened. It was in many ways a total surprise. Yeah.
So, Tayas, what gave you the idea to combine models or ex-models with terrorism in Glamorama, which is something else than a Juppie killer?
Well, you know, it wasn't necessarily the fact that I was thinking about combining models and terrorists. It just sort of flowed together, and it just came together while I was outlining the book. And I guess in the end, what I was really thinking about was the connection. It was really about insecurity, and I keep stressing this, the idea that as I talked about before, how I think that the beauty world and the world of fashion really does make us feel very insecure about ourselves, and makes us care about things that I don't think we normally would. Makes us worried about things in ourselves and about ourselves that we really shouldn't be worrying about. And that sense of insecurity, I think, is very, very damaging to a culture and to people at large. I think the sense of insecurity that terrorism voice upon us was also something that I was thinking about a lot, and I was just making that connection. I mean, I know they bomb airliners and they bomb government offices, but in a sense, that's just an act, and what they really want to do is make you feel very unsafe and worry and think about their cause and what they want. And so those two senses of insecurity, I think, was what I was putting together in Glamorama.
The two books, American Psycho and Glamorama, have something which gives the satire a hard edge, I think. It's a sense I get of disgust with a kind of, to use these words, big words, a kind of existential. It's not just superficial, look how superficial this modeling world is. It's not harmless satire, I think. Would you agree?
Yeah, I guess I would, but I think what motivates me as a writer is a satirical impulse, and what motivates me as a writer are things that really maybe do disgust me with society and with contemporary culture, and that's what I'm motivated by. That's what maybe the impulse is to write books like Glamorama or American Psycho or Less Than Zero for that matter. So I suppose I would have to agree with you on that. Maybe I'll be mellowing out a little bit, and maybe that won't be the main impulse the older I get. But I think that's a fair thing to say about the book so far.
Now, after Glamorama, you've started or are about to start a memoir, which seems to be totally different to write about yourself. Yeah.
I mean, I'm working on a memoir that's really about, I don't know if I want to publish it, but it's about my high school years and about my college years. And it's an exercise for me. I don't know if I want to publish it. It might turn out to be completely terrible, and I really wouldn't want anyone to see it. But I'm writing it because the novel that I kind of figured out how to do is going to be very autobiographical. And I kind of want to rid myself of any autobiographical tendencies before I actually write a fictional book that is autobiographical. I don't know if that makes sense at all. That sounds very fancy and weird to me. But that's, if you can understand what I'm saying. That's
Have you started it yet?
The book?
The memoir.
I've started the memoir and the book, yeah.
Do you find it difficult to write about yourself?
Well, after being on like a very long book tour like this, I find it not so difficult. I find it much more
comforting.
Not comforting exactly, but you know, no, I don't find the memoir that difficult to write. And the novel might prove to be more difficult. The novel will be more difficult to write, but the memoir, no, so far has not been bad.
Well, I think it's if anyone. Oh, perhaps you'd like to read something more, and then afterwards you can ask your questions.
This is from near the end of Glamorama. This is the section where Victor, the narrator, first meets his girlfriend and makes some decisions on that day. Sinead O'Connor was singing the last day of our acquaintance, and it was either 11 or 1, or maybe it was 3:15, and we were all lying around Gianni's pool in the big house on Ocean Drive, and there were about 20 of us, and everyone was talking into a cell phone and doing dope, and I had just met Chloe earlier that week. She was lying on a Chase lounge, burning under the sun, and her lips were puffy from collagen injections, and my skull was on fire from a hangover caused by a dozen mango daiquiris, and I was carefully eyeing the 40-carat diamonds she was wearing, and the lemonade I was drinking stung my mouth, and everyone was was saying, "So what?" and there had been a cockroach sighting earlier, and people were basically becoming unglued. There were boys everywhere, slim, full-lipped, big bulged, sucking in their cheeks, and there were also a couple of rock stars and a teenage gay guy from Palestine bragging about a really cool stone throwing he'd attended in Hebron. All of this under a calm gumball blue sky, and Sinead O'Connor was singing The Last Day of Our Acquaintance, and a girl lying across from me was positioned in such a way that I could see her anus, and she would reach under her bikini bottom and scratch it, then bring her fingers to her face and lightly smell them. On a huge Bang & Olufsen TV that had been wheeled out, an episode of The X-Files was playing where someone's dog had been eaten by a sea serpent, and for some reason everyone was reading a book called The Amityville Horror and tired from last night's premiere for a new movie called Autopsy 18. The guy hunched over the Ouija board, the girl just back from Madonna's baby shower, the kid playing with a cobra he'd bought with a stolen credit card. A big murder trial was going on that week in which the defense team convinced me that the victim, a 7-year-old girl fatally beaten by her drunken father, was actually guilty of her own death. Mermaids had been spotted during a swim before dawn. "Could you kill somebody?" I heard a voice ask. A moment passed before another voice answered, "Yeah, I guess so." "Oh, so what?" someone else moaned. Someone walked by with a panting wolf on a leash. And Sinead O'Connor was singing The Last Day of Our Acquaintance, and I had spent part of the morning trimming my pubic hair, and everyone was checking various gossip columns to see if they had made it, but they were basically one-shots, and it was never going to happen for any of them. And there was a Rauschenberg in the bathroom, and a Picasso in the pantry, and the guy I had slept with the night before, a boy who looked like Paul Newman at 20, started talking about a friend who had been murdered in Maui last week, and then everyone around the pool joined in, and I couldn't follow the conversation. A tiny rift with a drug dealer, an irate exporter-importer, a run-in with a cannibal? Who knew? Was his death bad? Well, he had been lowered into a barrel of hungry insects. A poll was taken on a scale of 1 to 10, being lowered into a barrel of hungry insects. Opinions were offered. I thought I was going to faint. This conversation was the only indication that anyone here knew anybody else. I lit a cigarette I bummed from River Phoenix. I was just becoming famous, and my whole relationship to the world was about to change. And Sinead O'Connor was singing The Last Day of Our Acquaintance, and someone tossed Pergola the keys to one of the Mercedes parked in the garage, and it was just too hot out, and a jet flew overhead, and I jealously studied a male model's face smirking at me from the cover of a magazine, and the guy I'd slept with the night before whispered to me, "You're a piece of shit." And there was my stunned disbelief, and me saying, "So what?" And I was so tan my nipples had changed color, and I looked down at my muscled body admiringly, but a fly was dozing on my thigh, and when I brushed it away it came back and hovered. A Brazilian boy asked me how I got my abs that cubed, and I was so flattered I had to concentrate very seriously in order to answer him. An injured bat had crawled out from beneath a Chase lounge, and it was chirping and flapping its wings uselessly, and a few of the teenage boys stood around it silently. The bat rolled over, upended, and when one of the boys kicked it, the bat screamed. Someone struck it with a branch, and a puff of dust flew off its skin. A light was flickering across the water in the vast pool on Ocean Drive, and I was watching everything through binoculars. A servant brought me a piece of birthday cake and a can of Hawaiian punch, as I had requested. The bat was wriggling on the ground next to a discarded mobile phone. Its spine was broken, and it tried to bite anyone who got near it. The boys continued torturing it. Someone brought out a fork. There was no system to any of this. At that point, Chloe Burns wasn't a real person to me, and on that afternoon in the house on Ocean Drive, a few decisions had to be made, the priority being I would never dream of leaving any of this. At first I was confused by what passed for love in this world. People were discarded because they were too old, or too fat, or too poor, or they had too much hair, or not enough hair, or they were wrinkled, or they had no muscles, no definition, no tone. They weren't hip, they weren't even remotely famous. This was how you chose lovers. This was what decided friends. And I had to accept this if I wanted to get anywhere. When I looked over at Chloe, she shrugged. I observed the shrug. She mouthed the words, "Take a hike." On the verge of tears, because I was dealing with the fact that we lived in a world where beauty was considered an accomplishment, I turned away and made a promise to myself to be harder, to not care, to be cool. The future started mapping itself out, and I focused on it. In that moment, I felt as if I was disappearing from poolside in the villa on Ocean Drive, and I was floating above the palm trees, growing smaller in the wide blank sky until I no longer existed, and relief swept over me with such force I sighed. One of the teenage boys was ready to pounce on me, and the boy splashing in the pool, I realized faintly, could have been drowning and no one would have noticed. I avoided thinking about that and concentrated on the patterns in a bathing suit that Marky Mark was wearing. I might not even remember this afternoon, I was thinking. I was thinking that a part of me might destroy it. A cold voice inside my head begged me to, but I was being introduced to too many cool people, and I was becoming famous. And at that point, I had no way of understanding one thing. If I didn't erase this afternoon from my memory and just walk out that door and leave Chloe Burns behind, sections of this afternoon would come back to me in nightmares. This was what the cold voice assured me. This was what it promised. Someone was praying over the half-smashed bat, but the gesture seemed far away and unimportant. People started dancing around the praying boy. You want to know how this all ends?